No introduction needed. You're here because you want to find out who the best legends are for beginners and why. Remember though, this is a tier list for beginners, players with zero or minimal experience playing Apex Legends Mobile. But yeah, let's not waste any more time and jump right in. I'll be ranking the legends from S tier to C tier, S being the highest. Alright, Bangalore. Bangalore is a legend that relies on absolutely no one. Her passive ability is awesome. When you get shot or thrown a boom boom pow at, you get a nice movement speed boost for 4 seconds, allowing you to escape quickly. Then, her tactical ability launches a smoke grenade that allows you to create cover when there isn't one available. Lastly, her ultimate ability is incredibly powerful and can slow enemies down. However, her tactical ability can also blind her teammates, and her ultimate ability not only damages herself, it also slows her teammates down, which could end up getting them killed if used incorrectly. Bangalore on her own is great, but with teammates she's a little bit more tricky to use. Not the most beginner friendly, but still a good beginner legend. And with all that in mind, Bangalore belongs in A tier. Bloodhound. This one's a no-brainer. Bloodhound's passive ability is the best single ability in the entire game. The amount of enemy intel you can get from this ability is insane. You don't even have to do anything either, they just pop up. Now, his tactical ability is literally wall hacks. It scans and highlights enemies even if they're behind walls, and it also tracks them in real time. Now, his ultimate ability shortens his tactical ability's cooldown from 25 seconds to 6 seconds. He also gets a 30% movement speed boost for the entire ult's duration, and his vision turns black and white and enemies are permanently highlighted in orange, easy for you to see. Yup, S tier, no discussion about it. Caustic. His passive highlights enemies that are inside the toxic gas. Now, his tactical ability allows you to place gas traps on the floor that releases toxic gas. However, for these traps to be effective, you really need to place them very strategically, or enemies just won't bother coming near you at all. His ultimate, on the other hand, is super easy to use. Just throw it and it's deadly immediately. But you still cannot just run in front of a full squad and expect to wipe everyone with it. With his passive only being useful when enemies are actually inside a toxic gas, and his tactical ability being very tricky to use against enemies, he just requires a little bit more of a higher level game sense to really shine. Something that most beginners just won't find easy at all in the beginning. With that in mind, C tier. Time for the very first mobile exclusive legend, Fade. Fade's passive ability is one of the best movement based abilities in the whole game. Right after you slide, you get a 15% movement speed boost for 4 seconds, and this can happen every 10 seconds. Then his tactical ability not only drags you out of danger and sends you into the void where you cannot be hit or killed, it also literally pulls you away from danger. Then his ultimate ability slows enemies down and sends them into the void where they cannot do anything at all, and as soon as they pop back out, you can easily take them out because you'll always know where they are. I never thought I'd say this for our very first exclusive legend, but S tier, super easy to use. Gibraltar, aka Gibby. In my previous tier list, I put him in S tier, but after some more careful consideration, let me explain first. His passive ability is incredible, no doubt about that. Every time you aim with your gun, a shield will pop up and offer you extra protection. His tactical ability, however, isn't actually as easy to be effective with as a beginner. Don't get me wrong though guys, this ability is the reason why Gibby is a must-have in every team in high-level gameplay. But that's high-level gameplay stuff. A beginner could very well easily waste the effectiveness of this ability because they just don't know when the best times are to use them early in their career. Much like Bangalore's ultimate ability, Gibby's ultimate ability is also great, but it can also damage and kill himself in the process if used incorrectly. With all that in mind, just like Bangalore, he's good for a beginner but just not the best as he requires a little bit more brain cells to use. So, A tier. Lifeline. Again, very similar to Gibby. In my previous tier list, I put her on S tier, but I drop her in A tier after more evaluations. Why? Okay, first of all, her passive ability is insane. She can call her drone to do the revival process for her and summon an unbreakable shield in the process. But the shield requires a bit of forward planning to figure out where and how to drop it for it to work effectively. And reviving someone in itself isn't just a simple run to the teammate and revive task. Sometimes you will need to think and ask your teammates to reposition somewhere safe so you both don't get killed. Her tactical ability is also great. It provides extra survivability, but often beginners just focus on using it for themselves, when in fact it should be prioritized for your teammates because that's what Lifeline Lifeline's role is. And guess what? Her ultimate ability is actually super easy to use. However, it has some mechanics that beginners might find a little confusing at first. Look, she's not that hard to use. All you've got to think about is how to protect your teammates. That is your role. And once you have that, she's relatively easy to use. And with all that in mind, A tier. Mirage, my all-time favorite legend. Mirage is simply one of the best legends for beginners, no doubt about that. His passive ability is insane. When reviving a teammate, Mirage and his teammate goes invisible after a couple of blinks. Not the hardest to work. Just make sure you don't start the revive process right in front of an enemy and you'll be good. Then his tactical ability sends a decoy copy of himself to confuse enemies with. Although this isn't the best skill at high-level gameplay, high-tier ranks, it is super easy to use and low-level players can easily get tricked with this ability. Now, his ultimate ability is hands down the most hilarious ability in the entire game. Upon using it, Mirage goes invisible for 1 second, then comes back out, and when he comes back out, 5 more copies of himself will pop out all at the same time, creating absolute mayhem and confusion. Yep, you guessed it. S tier. Octane, the most picked legend in the entire game. This guy was S tier in my previous tier list, but after spending months watching a lot of people play this guy, I dropped him to A tier because of his tactical ability. Hear me out. His passive ability heals his base HP over time, allowing him to survive a little longer. That's great, no worries. On the other hand, his tactical ability is a double-edged sword. It's great and terrible at the same time. It's a spammable with no breaks at all ability that provides him with a 30% movement speed boost, but it damages your health by 20% every time you use it. You wouldn't believe the amount of times I've seen an Octane player bum rush enemies while using his ability and keep spamming it mid-fight, then end up getting clapped because they have no HP left. It is absolutely laughable. On top of that, it's also a little harder to hit your shots when you're moving around so fast. Just not very beginner friendly at all. His ultimate ability is great though. Super easy to use, no problems at all. With all this in mind, he's going in A tier. Pathfinder. Pathfinder's passive ability is one of the worst in the game. Probably the worst actually. It is very much outshined by every other passive abilities in the game. All it does is it charges your ultimate ability to full every time you use one of these survey beacons, but it's just not something that you'd spend a lot of time naturally using throughout the game as a beginner. It's very time consuming to use a survey beacon and you are completely vulnerable when using it. Then his tactical ability has a lot of mechanics that you need to understand to use it in the first place. Then, using it mid-fight and getting to somewhere effectively and safely is a whole different story in itself. Same with his ultimate ability Zipline Gun. Yes, it is a great tool to travel with and help your teammates with, but it does require some forward planning to use it effectively for it to really make a significant difference. He's just not beginner friendly at all, so B tier. And last but not the least, Wraith. Again, this might cause another upset, but I'm very analytical. I look at everything and analyze everything, but more often than not, experience trumps theory. I barely played as Wraith, so when I finally played her, she is not S tier for beginners at all. In fact, she was one of the hardest legends I found to try and be good with. Her passive ability is a little lackluster because even though she speaks out loud when there's enemy threat, you still could have no idea where they are. Her tactical ability is great once you're inside the void, but before being able to go into the void, you get slowed and it takes at least 2 seconds to actually go into the void where you cannot be harmed. So often, I used this tactical ability at the wrong time and it got me killed very easily. Lastly, her ultimate ability is just not beginner friendly at all. This ability requires a lot of brain cells to be somewhat at least half effective with. I found it even more tricky to use than Caustic's toxic gas because this ability is one-time use only, so you really gotta make it count every single time. But I won't drop her as low as Caustic in C tier because Wraith doesn't need anyone but herself, nor does she need enemies to come to her. She's very capable of running the entire show on her own. With all this in mind, B tier for beginners. Next, find out what the best weapons are for beginners in this video right here. Oh! Maple syrup won it! GG's!